Good afternoon to all of you. Last presentation of the last presentation season semester 4, we deal with the paper of comparative literature and translation study, in which me, Pina Gondalia and Mahida Bhumika, we deal with the uh, article of E.V. Ramakrishnan, Shifting Center and Emerging Margin, Translation and the Shaping of Modernist Poetics, Discourse in Indian Poetry. Okay. First, we know about the introduction of E.V. Ramakrishnan. E.V. Ramakrishnan is one of the well-known Indian critic and poet. He is a bilingual poet. He wrote in English as well as in Malayalam language. He's the author of three books of poetry, publishing each after systematical intervals of 14 years, being elsewhere in myself, Python in a snake, and the term of sing, new and select poems. He is also the author of landmark book of translation of modern Indian poetry, The Free of Tongues. He teach English at South Gujarat State University at Surat. These are the table content of our discussion. First, we deal with introduction, then key points, key arguments about the book, which book this article taken, and then a conclusion. So the introduction, translation being looked something shaped Indian modernity in the language of Bengali, Marathi, and Malayalam, and how the modernity comes through the translation. This article focus on this. This article examines the role of played by translation in shaping a modernist poetic's sensibility in some of the major literary tradition of India in the 20th century between 1950s and 1970. The center, the chapter will study example of Bengali, Malayalam, and Marathi to understand how such a translation of modern Western poets were used to breach the hegemony of prevailing literary sensibility and poetics mode. Many Indian poets such Buddhadev Bose, Agyeya Gopal Krishnan, Adiga, and Dilip Chitre, and Ayappa Panikar were also translator and contributor himself. Uh, in the context of translation, enact a critical act of evaluation, a creative act of intervention, and a performative act of a legitimation in evolving a new poetic during the modernist phase of Indian poetry. The term translation to suggest a range of practice from critical commentary to create of intertextual text. An essay on T.S. Eliot in Bengali by Sudhindranath Dutt, or a sketching critic in Malayalam on the poetic practice of Velathol Narayan Menon by Ayappa Panikar can also described as a translation. Translation writing as they have element of translation embedded in them. These are the key points of this article. Translation is a most important key point in this article. Rewritings of reflection and then modernity and modernism, another one project of modernity in India, literary artistic movement, the post-colonial phase, the reception of Western modernist discourse in India, the metaphor of might, the human and the mechanical artificial intermingle in the subsequent land, suggesting a loss of human in the urban landscape, and the context point between East and West and modernity. And then translation enact a critical act and mythical character, figure of Gandhi, indigenous roots, the public world conflict, and the surreal images. These are the key point of this article. Key argument. Many critic argument in this article, and one of the question is that how are we evaluate the modernist that emerged in the post-colonial phase in India. So many critics such Simon Gikandi, Susan Friedman, Doyle and Laura Winkle and Aparna have argued that the non-Western modernism are not mere derivated version of European hegemonic practice. Another critic, R. Sasidhar, writes that if a European modernist was drawn between the euphoric and the reactive in Kannada, the precipitate modernist was drawn between the Brahmical and non-Brahmical. Just as Europic and the reactive modernism were part of the internal dynamic of modernism itself. So also Brahminical and the non-Brahmical modernism in Kannada were a part of parcel of modernism that comes as a reaction to the Nehruvian environment. And one of the recurring theme in Sudhindranath Datta's critical essay in the primacy of the world, in the necessity of the poetry, he argued that the persistence of a poetry through the age in all society, particularly among the unsophisticated and the primitive attest to its necessity. And another one, Madhvekar also argued that Malayalam poets to reject prosody in favor of ry- rhythmatic free verse in the sketching attack on Vellet Narayana Menon, and canonical figure of Malayalam romantic poetry. Panikkar brought out that Vellet's luck intellectual rigor is dubious political attitude and adherence to worn out items and state diction. This article taken from this book, Indigenous Imaginary and Literary Region Modernity. So for further discussion, I would like to call Bhumika.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. As Pina told about this article, I want to talk about the book Indigenous Imaginaries, Literature, Region, and Modernity, from which this article was taken. In this book, there are 16 various articles. 15 is uh, is shifting centers and emerging margins, translation and the shaping of modernist poetic discourse in Indian poetry, uh, which is in our syllabus. And in this book, Indigenous Imageries, this book argues for a redefinition of humanities from a comparative perspective, anchored in the regional literary traditions of India. And the central argument is that the need to reconfigure epistemologies that do not accommodate the compulsions of creativity and critical reflection in a multilingual society. Translation functions throughout this volume as the telos of uh, dialogic interdisciplinary mode of cognition that questions the exclusivist claims of Eurocentric formulations of the literary. And it also argues that the act of reading becomes an act of recovery when prescriptive protocols and absolute dictums are subverted, and through an intimate involvement with the subliminal, the unwritten, and the inarticulate embedded in literary texts. And the book analyzes the moral imaginaries that animate the works of Rabindranath Tagore, Vaikom Muhammad Bashir, Mahashweta Devi, Amitav Ghosh, Balchandra Nemade, Anand M. Mukundan, N.S. Madhavan, Aga Shahid Ali, and Jean Arasaniagam as evidences of revisionist ways of radical rethinking that can propel us in the direction of an interdisciplinary domain of comparative humanities. And as the conclusion, I want to say that thus language become for the modernist the only reality that they could relate to, and their moment of recognition enabled by the discourses of Western modernism was post-colonial in its essence, and the self-reflexive movement was also made possible by the carrying across of not content or form, but an interior mode of being that questioned the prevailing limits of freedom. Uh, this point is from taken this article. So here is our work cited, and thank you very much. Yes.
My question is that can you say for what the book Indigenous Imaginaries argues?
Yes, indigenous imagery argues for a redefinition of humanities from a comparative perspective, uh, anchored with the regional literary traditions of India.
My question is that my question is that what is importance of translations in this article?
Okay. Uh, in this article, as we know that a translation being looked at something shaped Indian modernity through the use of translation. We comes to know about the other languages, and then we comes to know about the modernity. So the through the translation, how modernity comes into India. This article focus on that. So we can say that a translation is an important role to for important role uh, mm, for bring modernity in India.
With this, we have ended our this season of presentations, and it was well done in a way. I hope, though this paper is a bit difficult, it's more theoretical, and the articles are also a little bit tough. But I hope reading and making presentation might have helped you in getting a grasp over all these research articles. The purpose also was to see that you become aware that how research articles are written. It is not an easy way to comprehend. Research works are written for academicians. It is not a kind of a formal writing for laymen. It is for the academician. So it has its own academic value, which makes it a little bit difficult for a normal layman human being to understand or comprehend those ideas. But there is also something to be learned as a part of academic writing. Okay, so we end this session here with this remark.